Hi everyone, and welcome to Noona's Noonchi, where I do a deep dive into some of your favorite K-dramas from a mental health perspective. We're going to begin exploring Han, the Korean word for emotional experience, emotional journey, an array of emotions that range from anger, resentment, hatred, rage, remorse, to deep sorrow, grief, regret, sadness, hopelessness that embodies trauma or traumatic experience to also resiliency and hope. Han, it's even hard to describe in the English language, but it's embedded in Korean culture and you see it threaded throughout K-dramas. And Han refers to really, Korea's been through a lot and its people. So that Han experience comes from generations of oppression, dates way back when. And I want to say that Han is threaded through many families, and I see it as a family therapist. So what does Han look like? I'll give you an example. And how does it relate to mental health? Episode 9 in My Mister. It's a dramatic episode. Let's talk about the three characters involved in that episode and how each of them, specifically Park Dong-hoon, main character, shows Han to fight off this gangpae, this loan shark that's been literally beating to a pulp the main character, the female protagonist, Lee Ji-yeon. Poor girl has been through a lot. Her mother took off with tons of money, so that's why Ji-yeon has been consistently paying off her mother's debt. She has a deaf grandmother who's helpless. Basically, she takes care of her. This girl has the world on her shoulders, parentified, meaning acting as a parent, as a child, never really had a child, no one to support her. So there's bitterness there, and you see that early on, just this somber, morose look that she carries with her a lot. But she begins to soften, and whether she knows it or not, she is becoming changed through Park Dong-hoon, his character, his integrity and kindness, which we'll talk in another episode. But for today, I want to give you a first look at Han. Toward the end of episode 9, Park Dong-hoon goes to confront the gangpae, Kwang-yu, okay, who does a good job of just looking scary, beating Ji-yeon up every time he can to get that money that she owes him. She owes him quite a lot from her mom. And this ajushi looks after Ji-yeon over the years because, again, her mother never showed up to her elementary school graduation. It's just a sad story. Park Dong-hoon, for the first time, hears just how sad and tragic her life has been. He goes to find the gangpae, in his mind, to help her. Now, don't forget, spoiler alert, Ji-yeon has wiretapped his phone for another reason altogether. So she's listening to him confront this gangpae. But what really is amazing is, okay, he's a middle-aged man, the main character, Park Dong-hoon, facing a gangpae guy who's like over 6 feet tall, really big and burly, and has beaten Ji-yeon up, and clearly he probably can beat this guy up. However, through Han, Park Dong-hoon's Han of like, how, almost like injustice, how dare you treat this girl like this? How dare you do this? What does she owe you? Let me help. And, you know, the gangpae's like, is kind of mocking him and whatever, doesn't really answer him, and now he goes to go help Ji-yeon. But in the end, he ends up fighting this guy. I think the scene is a beautiful representation of the Han and Park Dong-hoon. Now, Park Dong-hoon also has somewhat of a sad life, a wife that's been cheating on him, spoiler alert, and just kind of didn't get a promotion. He's not really valued at work. His colleagues love him, but it's hard to explain. But he has that sad middle-aged existence at this point and wants to do good, and he's such a good man. He fights this guy for Ji-yeon. Now, meanwhile, in the fight, the gangpae's like, hey, she doesn't deserve this. She killed my dad. There's a pause. Now, Ji-yeon is listening to this. Don't forget, she has wiretapped his phone. You see her pause like, okay, there he goes. He hears everything about me. At this point, she's really learning to like Park Dong-hoon. And at that moment, she hears that she stops in her tracks. And I know that she's thinking, oh my gosh, my secret's been revealed. I'm a murderer. Now he knows my true self. Guess what happens? Park Dong-hoon says, hey, I'd kill your dad too if someone was beating up on my family. The whole point of that came through the Han, of feeling such empathy and compassion for Ji-yeon, but also his own Han, his own experience being like, don't you dare talk to me, this middle-aged man. I know what I'm doing. I can fight you. I have brothers, all this stuff that he said. And then also feeling like I'm going to fight for this girl, to defend her. Ji-yeon hears this and buckles to her knees and starts bawling. And that's her Han. The remorse, the resentment and anger and hatred she felt for the world. No one has ever defended her like that. She had to fend for herself. And she for the first time, I feel like expresses all of that grief, you know, having her childhood taken away from her, the trauma of having to deal with the kid, that gangpe kid beating her up, but she holds her own. But don't forget, that's not easy, being beaten up, physically abused by somebody, right? By the way, Kwang Il also has that. He has his own Han story, which I'm not going to outline now, but his own father was the one that Jian killed, was also like that to him. And so don't forget that intergenerational trauma threaded throughout, specifically the gangpe kid and Jian. Wow. So Jian buckles down, cries, expressing for the first time perhaps the relief she may have felt, someone defending her, feeling understood perhaps for the first time, and also maybe sadness of the life she has because she's been having this strong front, right? That Han. How does this directly tie to mental health? Mental health is not linear, as I've said before, circular. So you could be experiencing an array of emotions from hatred, rage, anger for somebody, but also that deep sorrow about it because you love this person innately, like your parent, right? But then yet this parent is acting such hatred to you, so you hate them back. But again, also the sadness because they're supposed to be your parent and supposed to take care of you and love you, right? That's kind of what the gangpe is going through. Jian feeling like she has gotten the worst hand at life, having to take care of everything, fending for herself, taking care of her grandmother, being beaten to a pulp, trying to get money, constantly in debt, and then feeling that Han experience of just emotion letting go. That sadness, her own trauma. She has led a very traumatic life. And Tongun delving deep to beat this guy up too. I mean, basically at the end, they called it. It's even. He wasn't beaten up by this big guy, this big young guy. He also fended for himself through his own Han of being like, you know what? I can do this. I can fight for somebody because he's kind of stomped over at work. There's a lot going on in his own life. His wife's having an affair. He knows about it, hasn't said anything. Han. Again, that sorrow, grief, remorse, regret, sadness, everything in that combined with the anger and hatred and feeling unjust and oppressed and how dare you do this to me. You can have both experiences. In mental health, you can't turn off an emotion and go, let me turn this off. I just want to feel this. It's okay to feel both. In fact, that is the dualities of our experiences. It's super important to understand that these emotions can intersect all the time at any given time. The dialectics into play. You could have different thought processes, right? Hate to love, right? You know, that's where the love-hate comes from. But also the experience of, I'm so sad that this is happening, but I'm also happy that this is happening because of another reason. Does that make sense? The dialectics. There's also something called dialectical behavioral therapy. That's why it exists. You can have those polar opposite thinking. Now, but this is the purpose though. You want to be able to balance those emotions, okay, with healthy behaviors. And so that's my purpose in sharing today. Han, it's understood. It's valid. I'm not going to try to take away your Han and say, hey, don't feel that. That's showing trauma symptoms. No, I'm going to say clearly it's understandable. Depending on your experience. It's a part of you. It's actually what they say, Han is embedded in the Korean culture, in our DNA. It's there. Can't take that away. That's part of our identity. However, what can you do to channel it effectively, positively, to do good in your life, to be good in your life? You want to live a happy life. So that Han was channeling Jian to survive. And then we see a transition with her. Tongun was also channeled by that Han. He let go at that moment to really beat that guy up and fend for himself and defend her and get what he needed out of this guy. Where the guy, was like, whoa, I'm taking this guy seriously. That's super important. All of that culminated toward the end of episode 9. So I wanted you to take a look at that as an example of what that looks like. Now, I don't necessarily recommend in your Han experience to beat somebody up, but at that moment, it made sense. So I hope I'm making sense. You're going to have to see it in context. Again, what are you doing about your emotions? How are you channeling them? How do you balance, right, those hatred or that anger emotion with happiness? It's important to do that. You can feel them at the same time. It's important to understand intergenerational trauma, which we'll talk about, also is part of that Han experience where the trauma over generations. You may have experienced a trauma through your parents that you knew nothing about. They haven't even told you about it, perhaps. A lot of parents struggle, especially immigrant parents struggle with sharing about their struggles, leaving war-torn Korea or a war-torn country to come to the U.S. That's a very traumatic experience. Can you imagine that? You don't really know, except you know that your parents left that country to come here for a better life. But you can feel their Han. And you can feel the trauma in the words that they say, the things that they project onto you, their behavior, what you see. So that's what I mean by intergenerational trauma. We can unlearn those patterns. We can break unhealthy patterns. And that's what I try to do. So it's important to look at that now. Perhaps you can look at your Han in a way of, what can I do about this? Not letting it just fester, but also accepting it. It's that balance going, I acknowledge I feel this way. But what can I do to feel better or do this for good so that I'm effective in my life, so I can live a good life, so I can do good, be good for my family, be not verbally abusive or even physically abusive because I'm experiencing this Han that I have. It's not good to say, how can I get rid of this? This is terrible. How dare they feel that way? How dare they do that? See that empathy that also comes in that Han experience, and what can you do to live well? That's the question I want to ask. This was your first look at Han through my Mr. Beautiful K-drama, 2018 K-drama that won the Paksang Award, and episode 9, showing those characters through their own Han experience. Thanks for joining me. Please don't forget to subscribe to Noona's Noonchi and hit the bell button so you're notified of new episodes each week.